I've asked that question myself to people, and I respond most like everybody else does. It's usually negative, something like fight or
Yeah.
two parties getting together and it's not fun, and anger and all those kinds of things. But really, I think conflict is just two parties coming together at any one time, and you're always going to have some kind of a disagreement over something. So it's not necessarily negative. It really needs to be positive. I think that American culture, especially in the South, is very conflict adverse. They don't want to confront it. They may talk about it at other times, but I don't think they want to confront the person necessarily, and they want to be conflict free, which is absolutely impossible. And so I'd say 80 to 90% of the world, or especially North America, don't like it. And then there's always that group that like it so much that they'll stir something up no matter what. They're just bored. So and they like to stir the pot, so to speak. I've had several that have dealt with such petty issues that anytime I've had those, it's not about that petty issue. It's always about something underneath. I always have to listen, and the listening part of it is is a big deal, and just say, okay, let's really hear what's going on here. So I learned from those. One in particular, I think, I won't mention the church, but they had an argument over, and actually fired the pastor over this, who was going to mow the cemetery. And it got between two families in the church, and the pastor took the wrong side, and as a result, he got in the midst of that. Well, the problem wasn't really that. He didn't really get fired over over that. It was over a lot of different issues that he wasn't addressing. He just let things kind of ball up. It wasn't to the point of that was the make or break thing. That was just the straw that broke the camel's back kind of situation, and that happens a lot. I think that, and this has been true for me personally, because I've been up until the last few years. It's been hard for me to deal with it as I pastored, especially. I didn't understand. But the thing that I think that young pastors and any pastor could understand is that conflict is a part of life, and I've mentioned that already. Every church is going to have conflict. In fact, if you don't, there's something wrong. I always say there are some churches that don't have any conflict, but they're dead. Because the only persons that don't have conflict in their life are dead people. It's been determined. That eternity is determined. So I think that we have to understand it's a part of life. It's about managing it. As I said earlier, everyone wants to have a conflict-free life, but that's just impossible. You've got to manage it. And then if I would say to leaders, not only manage it, but also embrace it. You're never going to have, I don't believe in the whole term conflict resolution. I believe in incident resolution. So Apostle Paul had some people he had conflict with. I mean, you take Peter and even Demetrius, the coppersmith, or whatever, those kinds of, there were different issues, but he confronted it and he resolved it. John Mark was another. He got to that point where he said, okay, I'm going to confront this, and I'm going to get it to the point where it's part of my bigger conflict of life, but I'm going to resolve this incident. And you see what happened as a result of that. John Mark, at another point, joined him. And so I think one of the things we do is we think that if we can't completely do away with it, then we're not successful. And that's just not true. It's about how managing it and then embracing it. Some of the times when you have teams, and I know you've done a lot of work on teams, when you get teams together, you need to expect that. As a matter of fact, it's good. Because when you come together in a team meeting, you diversify from what going in with a certain attitude or a certain idea, and you listen to the rest of the team, and that's the diversification, that's the conflict, and you come out of that with a new understanding that you may have got a lot of what you wanted, but it's more of the team is owning it. You may have come out of there with nothing that you wanted, but the team is owning it instead of just you owning it. This is particularly true for pastors and leaders. I think that a lot of times we think that as a pastor, we've got to get everything we want. That is going to be one conflict after another. If you're going to do life like that, if you're going to do your leadership like that. So I think it's important that we come back and say, okay, conflict is my friend. It's going to be a part of it, and I'm going to manage it like I manage a grizzly bear, or something like that, so that I know going in that there's going to be other. I call it the collective brilliance of the group. You bring that brilliance together, and you say they're going to make this idea that I have, or whatever it may be. I'm going to make this better. If conflict comes out of you being pig-headed or just stubborn, then you've got to see, okay, I've been stubborn, on this issue. And you may be completely right. And then you've got to say, okay, I know I'm right, and I got to be right on this issue. Then you say, okay, I got to stand my ground. Most of the time, it's not like that. That's an extreme. So I think as a leader, you need to go into conflict and say, hey, I'm going to have it. I'm going to expect it. I'm going to manage it. And I'm going to get to it quicker than I have in the past. I think you got to back up and say, maybe it's better to say it's not my enemy. So to me, that's my own personal preference. To me, if it's not my enemy, then it's my friend. It's not. And friendship is in layers, But if you can embrace it and say, "Hey, this is something that's going to make me better instead of making me worse." If you say to a person who comes at something totally different than you do, and you don't see it the way that they see it, but you embrace them as that unique person that God's created in your life for a reason. Now, there's some people who are just knuckleheads. I mean, that just like I said, the 10% that like to stir the pot. But there's most of them are those people who will come back and want it to be better. And so you can see that conflict that's going to happen as something that is your ally, your friend, so that you can use it to be a better leader and to get a better resolution or a result than what you thought you had. I always compare it to like used to have a graphic artist that worked for me. And I would say, hey, I want this and I want these elements in it. And I kind of want it to look like this. Well, he was the expert in it. And I said, but I trust you. It always came back better than when I wanted. I would never envisioned it that way because he's trained. He's an artist. He's talented. And so you say, hey, you're the guy that knows how to do this. As long as you've got my concept and understand what is going on, as a leader, I think you've got to have a big picture rather than every little detail, because they're going to make it better if you'll keep that and keep your conflict as the friend that it is. I think that's true because of the way we parent the way parenting is happening today. You don't have the balance anymore. It's either, the whole concept of the helicopter parent. Now there's a new one called the lawnmower parent, that mows down everything in front of their child because they don't want to have them to have any conflict. They want them to win at all costs. And so I'm going to take all that in. Well, that's not life. I mean, that's why we're seeing some of the things we're seeing. We're seeing people who, before, say, the pandemic, were so emotionally spent and so dysfunctional in the way they deal with life that when something like this happens, it just pushes them over and it boils over. It's like a volcano. The active volcano in Hawaii is the one that's it's active. It's constantly going. I went there. There's always venting. There's There's a smell of sulfur in the air and all that. And then every once in a while, it builds up to the point it has to just erupt, and it's just everywhere. That's what we're dealing with. I mean, you can see it in everything. You go drive in your car this afternoon on the interstate, see what happens. These people are angry, and it's a lot of it is just because, life in general, and then life disrupted has just been crazy. And that's the way we deal with it. So instead of saying conflict is something I need to deal with, conflict is something that I need to embrace, conflict is my friend, I need to manage this on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, we let it just go, and we don't want to confront it. And so suddenly when things are just upside down, all of a sudden, it's inappropriate. Anger and those kinds of things are happening. A part of it is because our culture has taught us the only way to deal with conflict is either fight or flight. And that's the two choices that we have. When a bully on the playground hit you in the nose and you came home with a bloody nose, your mom or daddy said, well, if he hits you, what? Hit him back. If a bully hit me, I'd go hide somewhere. I just wouldn't get around them. And so that's flight. Well, that's not dealing with the conflict. Dealing with the conflict means that you are able to go in and say, okay, let me listen to you. Let me see what's going on here. And the truth is that there's a bully in every church. There's a church bully in every church. And most pastors have identified him or her, but have not dealt with them. Or they say something to them, bullying them around, and so let's say something back. And so before you know it, you've got their followers and his followers and his polarization and all that kind of thing. So we need some very good processes to deal with conflict. And the number one thing a leader has to do is open your mind, open your heart. When Jesus said, if somebody is to strike you on the cheek, turn the other cheek, he wasn't saying lay it down and being a doormat. He was saying be willing to go to that person and say, hey, why didn't you hit me? What's this about? Tell me what's really going on in your life. And that's not our first reaction. That's a fleshly reaction of fight or flight. But the biblical scriptural concepts are, let's get to the bottom of what's going on here. And there's a lot of ways to do that. There's a whole seminars on how to deal with that. And it has to do with your own personal personality, the way you're wired up, the way your relationship with God is, those kinds of things. And I want, like you said, there's no magic bullet because each individual is different. So I would say to you, there are some basic things to just begin opening your life, listening to the person, trying to understand what's going on. Some cases you can't do that. The other thing that Jesus said was when things don't happen a certain way and you have conflict in a town or something like that and they don't accept you, go to the edge of the town and just move on. I think we hold on to things and places and people way too long and too much. And Jesus never told us to do that. He said, go to the fields that are ripened to harvest. Go to the fields that are fertile. And I'm not saying move to another church every time you have a conflict, but I am saying if there comes a point where you just got to say, okay, you know what, I've done all I can, and that's enough. I think the conflict with the person can clear up the air on what's going on with that person and what you're dealing with as a person too. And you have a resolved, so to speak, or a well-managed conflict that you're going to be able to say, hey, I'm a better person because of what we've gone through and how this is. And I have a better understanding of you and you have a better understanding of me so that we can, as the community of faith, go along together on this journey. I think that's a lot of our ineffectiveness in churches and organizations these days has to do with the fact that it's just, we're not going to manage it and we don't care. I just said you should move too soon, but sometimes it's way too soon. So we deal with conflict by flight and we just say, I don't care. I'm just going to move on. It's me, and me. That's this rugged individualism. It's just, not what was intended by our Lord when it comes to the church or any organization. We're to do this together and be together. And when we go through those conflicts, we can go back and say, I had a conflict with that guy, but he's my best buddy now. Let me give you an example. There was a guy, I'm back in a town that where I pastored 20 years ago. So the church I pastored is, I'm helping them find a new pastor, as a matter of fact. A guy in town that asked me to leave the church because he was the chairman of the deacons. He didn't like what I was doing. And so he asked me to leave the church, him and a couple other guys. Well, 20 years have come and gone. And I've been down some roads since then, and so has he. And I knew he was here in town. But instead of avoiding him, which is what I did back then, and, I thought, well, good riddance when I left, I sought him out. He's going to another church now. And he and his wife, and my wife and I, and he and his wife have been out to eat several times. And when people say, well, time heals everything, that's true. But at one point I told him, Bob, you were right on some things. And you made me a better person because of where I am. That whole heartache that I thought this guy's just of the devil really prepared me for what I was going to go through in the state conventions where I served, first in Missouri and then South Carolina. It helped me to understand better what was going on in a certain situation. And now I understand Bob a lot better. 20 years makes a big difference in somebody's life, made a difference in my life. And I have to say to him, he's more my friend now, although I left him as my enemy. So I just think it's a cool thing to understand that. It's narrow-sightedness. That's not even a word, but I'm going to use it. They have a narrow sight of what's going on at the time. They don't see how this incident is fitting into their entire life. 20 years ago, I didn't see how that incident was fitting into my life. It was not until I went somewhere else and looked back on it that I thought, oh, that's why God put that there. That's why, although it hurt. I was really upset. And by the way, I stayed 2 years after that happened. So that kind of helped too. But if it's about, I'm gonna do this in spite of you, I'll show you, or I'll do this or I'll do that. I don't know that that's really healthy. I think we've got to understand the big picture. So here I am sitting 20 years later, looking back on what Bob did and how he did that and who he was and what he was doing to me, I thought at the time, and saying, oh, you know what, that's not really that big of a deal. I had a conflict, let's say 30 years ago with a guy who just thought about life different than I did. He liked to keep junk in his backyard. He's one of those real conservative, grew up in the Depression and all that. Well, I didn't do that. I'm not that kind of person. But he and I would have conflict all the time. And then I go back and think about that. I had an argument with him about something to do with the heat pumps. He wanted to save money, which is all what he's always about, by turning the heaters off the heat pumps in the summertime. And he thought that would save on electric bill. Well, I just led into him about that. And it's kind of like, well, who cares? It doesn't matter anymore. He's going on to glory now, and he surely doesn't care about it. But see, I still remember it, and I remember what that issue was, but it's taught me to say, in the big picture, is this really worth the time and effort you're putting into it? And I'm learning that right now, the conflicts I'm having right now is, okay, now let's deal with this. What is God saying? How is God working with me in this? And how can I take this and use it and understand a different perspective on it rather than just saying, oh, this is just awful and they're of the devil and I can't believe it. It calms you down. It makes you see life in a different Recently, in the middle of all this COVID stuff, when they got us shut down and everything was just like, I was just mad. I just thought, what's going on? And this is going to be, and then finally the Lord got me quiet enough, and I got quiet enough I could hear him. And basically he said, I want you to get into all of the letters of Paul and just get into those things. And let's talk. Man, God started speaking to me about things that, I preached through those things 2 or 3 times. You know how it is. You get your special seminary classes and all that. But the Lord spoke to me about the way Paul did things. And Paul was not wired the way I am. He's a lot more confrontive. But here's what he did. If he had a conflict, and there's some of them that you don't even remember, but there was a certain conflict, and he would say, this person and this person has deserted me. Or this person and this person has done this to me. But that's okay. Because God has got this on, for me. And he's dealing with these things in this area because of that. The book of Philemon is, just a few verses, but it's about a conflict that he's having with a slave called Onesimus. And he says, I'm going to send Onesimus back to you, and you just go ahead and greet him. He's fine. It's okay. I know you're mad about it. I know you're upset. And I know that you're dealing with all of those issues. But I'm sending him back to you, a different person. He's going to be okay. You all are going to be okay. I mentioned the deal about John Mark, and that's another one that's a part of it. Timothy is encouraged. The church at Ephesus is what's going on there. How Paul says to Timothy, get to these things and deal with these things. If you've got stomach problems, take a little wine for the medicinal purposes, those kinds of things. Go ahead and work these things out. Very practical ways of dealing with this. So I think that there's a one that really stands out to me, and it's not about the Paul letters, but the prodigal son. To me, you got 2 boys in conflict. They're both prodigals. That parable really should be called the waiting father, because the father is the one who waits on his son who's in a far off country. And the older son comes in and said, hey, what's the deal? You never did treat me like that. So you see this conflict going on in this family. Very dysfunctional family. Because the young guy says, I'm going to act like you're dead. I want my stuff now. The older guy says, well, I'm going to hang around and I'm going to get the better of the two. Well, he doesn't. He doesn't understand. And Jesus so wonderfully says through the Father, you're my son. You've always been here. Both you guys are my son. And I want to celebrate and deal with this in the right way. So I think those are good ways to look at it. I would say 2 things. One of them is I don't like this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's the patience that you're going to have. This too will pass. Will everything be the same when we're done? No. And so the expectations need to be that it's going to be different. And why did it happen? You've got to say, well, I don't know. But you have to be patient and say, okay, this is what's going on. And you have to accept it. So patience, accepting, adaptability, because this is just the tip of the iceberg. I think it's huge what's happened, but I think people have been going so fast that they haven't even seen it. It's like you're going so fast on the interstate, you don't even see what's going past you. You're going so fast. And using it in a positive way to let God slow you down and say, okay, what's really the issue for you? Why are you all upset about this conflict that's going on? And what can you do as a person to make you better as a result? Nobody likes to put on the brakes. Nobody likes the parenthesis in their life. Everybody just wants to keep on going until we drop over dead somewhere. Well, God's brought this for a very important reason. I don't know if God brought it, but he knew it was coming, and he can use it in your life to make you into somebody that you weren't at the beginning, and make you stronger and make you better. So when the next conflict comes along, whether it's on a worldwide scale or not, you can deal with it better. And hey, you've been through this, you can deal with something like that. So it's a good way to deal with it.